All right. Is this thing on? Okay. Thank you. Cool. Guys, just your attention for a second. It is time to introduce Peter. If you've been around in the industry like me, you know Peter for like a while. So Peter is one of our experts in the Nordics, based in Denmark. And today he's going to be talking to us about QA, I guess, quality assurance and testing. Take it away.
Thank you. Greetings from the north. Yes, this is more or less the longest title I could come up with. But this is what I'm going to talk about. I want to show you how to use an end-to-end testing tool, but to test your tracking implementations instead of all of the UI stuff. So, what is end-to-end testing? I liked that Lukas actually mentioned unit testing. So very roughly speaking, I would put it like this. You have unit testing, which I would roughly speaking say is testing individual parts of code in an app, on a website, what have you. Then you have integration testing, where you kind of test how your code parts work together. And then we have end-to-end testing all the way up there, which I would describe as user journey testing, you could say. So testing what the user normally would do and see if it breaks somewhere in a checkout flow or something like that. I don't know how many people know what end-to-end testing is, but just to mention this, usually end-to-end frameworks support two ways of running. Most of them would run command line, you could say headless, so that it doesn't show you the browser, but it does all the things in the browser, and then gives you a result about what failed and what didn't. But a fun thing is that you can usually also, in at least several user testing frameworks, make the machine run the test, but show you while it's doing it. And why am I mentioning this right now? That's because this is how that looks if I start it. This is kind of a little bit annoyingly quick. But as you see already now, it's quicker than a human doing this. And here you, of course, to the right, see what it's doing for reals. But over here you can see that it's listing the steps, and all of the assert ones is then assertions we make that pass. So I expect something to happen, and if it's green, then it did happen. So the test is a success. Also a little, I don't know if this is a Trello board or something similar. Just so you kind of roughly know what a user test is if you haven't seen one before. Then we have, at least today, several user testing frameworks. And I greened out the one called Cypress because that's what I will show you something of today. And that's Node.js based, so you use JavaScript or TypeScript, it also supports. And what I like about that product is that it also has a very nice UI, visible UI to see these tests either while you create them or when the machine runs them for you. A thing that looks really nice as well is Playwright, which is something made by Microsoft, and it also supports even more browsers, platforms, and languages than Cypress does. Then a lot of people know Puppeteer, made by Google, also node-based like Cypress, but the thing about that one is that it's strictly Chrome-based. So if you would like to test on different kinds of browsers, the same test across browsers, then that could be an issue there, but actually really cool product anyway. Then we have Selenium, and people who knows about end-to-end testing probably knows Selenium, because that's kind of the grand old old school product for this. As I said, I'm new, but to me it seems a little bit more clunky than some of the more modern ones. But yeah, still a good product. Then we also have a totally different category, and that's LeapWork, because that's actually an example of a product where you can create your end-to-end tests, but without using code. The rest of them end up with code, at least. You have helpers and stuff in some of them that generate the code for you, but you would need to know the code, I would say. More exist as well. The ones with this weird eye is ones supported by Browser Stack. And if you don't know what Browser Stack is, then that's kind of actually a crazy cool product. You have a browser, you log in, and then you have virtual machines with more or less any browser available in the world, and OSs galore. You of course pay for that, but they also have an automation version kind of a thing called Automate, funnily enough. And that supports the ones with the eye here. If it's an eye, I think so. But looking at this very nice graphics thing I made myself, to be honest, the cloud kind of signals that I think something is missing. Now the big question is, what do you think is missing? Tracking, at least how I see it. I hear a lot of people doing end-to-end testing, but I don't hear that much about end-to-end testing. And I know that there's people in the room here that actually wrote about it. I will mention some names a little bit later. But it was kind of a little bit hard to find resources. So I'm thinking, are that many people doing it then? I actually don't think so, but it might be a small sample at Copenhagen Measure Campus. I don't know. But we had big companies in the room, I have to say, world large. But yeah, I want to show you some Cypress stuff, and what is Cypress then about? This actually sums it up nicely, I think. This is actually the UI I'm talking about, this browser window. So as the video we saw earlier, this is the test running through, and tick marks in green when stuff is working, and then it does crazy fast stuff over here. But what you do to make all of this happen is that you actually create spec files. This is a TS file, so that's made in TypeScript, and you kind of program your tests. It also provides, other frameworks does that as well, but specific end-to-end testing functionality. So for instance, this one, wait. You can tell it to wait a little bit before doing something, or you could maybe say, okay, create a snapshot of something. But it's kind of nice helper methods, but mixed together with normal code, you could say. Yeah. So what would we like to look at testing-wise today? This very nice site. This is so nice, especially the colors. This is my, let's say, sporadically updated blog. Very much public, but sporadically updated. It's a static site generated by the static site framework Hugo. I have Google Tag Manager on it, and then I have asked, or I have set up Hugo to even though it generates the site, it also adds generic page information to each page when it creates them. So I have something like author and type and all sorts of things. I also put GA4 on, but a very lazy GA4 implementation, because this is just put it on and do nothing about it, more than just put it on. But I have the normal enhanced measurement enabled. So for instance, things like scroll has been turned on, but directly as GA4 intends it, and nothing customized by me. Then what I wanted to look at was that when the page loads, that we have this page information I mentioned when the page is loaded, and that a page view request is sent to GA4 as well, included at least some of that information as well. And then to try some UI-ish things, then scroll to the bottom of the page, and then check that a scroll depth event is put into the data layer of GTM, and then also that a scroll event has been sent as a request to GA4 servers. And then last but not the least, when around the bottom, click my Twitter social link and then check that GA4 gets a click event with information about that. That's the Twitter thingy up here. Yeah. So, running the tests, I will show code, but first running the test. This might scare someone, but this is actually the headless running of this. And let's see if I can get this one to work. I can. So this is just it telling me what browser it's running on, and you can also see up here I'm actually starting it in my command line, and I'm telling it to use Chrome. It's telling me what version I have, and then it's also telling me that in my spec folder it found one file with this name. And then it starts running down here, and I then chose to have these very non-standard test names, but all of these are tests. And in this case, on this page, all of these tests pass, so it's saying 7 passing. If we scroll further down, this is me trying to scroll further down, then this is where we left off, so 7 passing. Then it sums up. And then it actually also, in this case, tells me that I wanted to have a video as well, and that it spent 15 seconds. And then it's telling me that it ran this one spec, because that's the only one I have, and then where I can find the video. So just an example of this running headless without me seeing anything, but still getting a video I can look at later on if I want to. And this is, of course, very usable, for instance, in a thing like a website build deploy thing. So if that happens automatically when something updates functionality-wise on the website, you could actually set this up to run and then fail the build if the tests don't pass, which is what I find is really nice here. So, all the way down in the end, where my command prompt shows again, it's just summing up all of the spec files that it ran, and in this case, to repeat myself, 1 file, 7 passing tests. And this is then the generated video. So kind of like the other one, but this is then the specific test I showed you, and the video as a result of the test I created. And restart. It's looping. Yes. So to look at some of the code in this, I hope this doesn't scare anyone, but it kind of looks like this, all of it. This is just not all of it, but all of the tests I'm showing, but the one scrolling to the bottom and checking for footer visibility, that was one of the 7 that passed, is actually, I would say, rather simple. So this it thing, starting here and ending here, that's one test. So I tell it to scroll to the bottom, so again, a reusable helper method. And I'm actually also telling it to use a duration of 2000 milliseconds and ease in linearly, so that it kind of scrolls kind of, in my head, it would be kind of more like a human instead of this. And then, quite easily enough, I would say, I say get footer. This is then a CSS selector I can put in here. I know this is the CSS selector I can put in to get my footer, and then that should be visible. So the test part would be the end one down here. Yeah. That's the smallest one I have, though. So if we look at the check Twitter link one, it gets to be a little bit more complicated. But if you know JavaScript, I wouldn't say so much. But check Twitter social link and click it. So if we look at the startup here, I just gave it a name, exactly the same as what I just said. Then I'm getting the item, and I know that's an A HTML tag with this title in the HTML. Then I do something with it. So if I get this item, I'm saying I expect the class name to be this value. And if it is, then return this text. So that's kind of like an added benefit. This would be a tick mark, but it will also say this message. And then I also want to check, in this case, the href of the same link. It's supposed to be this URL, and then return this text if it passes. And then the last thing, just to be a little bit specific, I want to make sure that the target attribute is blank, meaning that it shows in a new tab on your window. And then the return text again. So then when I know all of this is there, then I know it's the correct link, and then I click it. In this case, that's the test for this part. And then also looking at data layers in Google Tag Manager, then it gets to be a little bit more JavaScripty than just Cypress. But if we point again, the top one here is just checking that the data layer for Google Tag Manager is there on this particular web page, and that in the data layer we can find the GTM.js event telling us that GTM actually loaded on top of having the data layer. That's a separate test. And then we have the second test saying that I actually want to check that it has the correct content when the page loads. And in this case, I'm actually saying, because I know I can have different entries, multiple entries in my data layer, I'm specifically saying I want the first one, because that's the one I know already is supposed to contain all of my metadata, whatever, about the page. And then this is a nice one. You can do an assertion thing again. So I expect this to be like this. But if you do this deep include, you can say in this data layer, I want all of these to have these names and these values. So you could say a short way to do multiple checks, because then it checks, is page author there? Does it have this value? Is this one there? So it has multiple checks, but I just put the list in. I find that quite clever, actually. But that's all of the data layer parts for when the page loads. And then it gets a little bit more complicated. I'm actually not sure that I like this part that much, to be honest. You can do this in different ways, but what I chose to do was to, as it says, intercept. I chose to intercept all requests sent to GA4 servers. So I say intercept and then all requests with this URL. Then it has some stars just saying this is a wildcard, so it can be whatever in this placement of the URL. But this is what I'm using to catch these requests. And then I choose to return a status code, so my browser would get told that this returns a 503 error. I'm doing this to block it entirely and tell the browser that it's blocked. What is that? Service unavailable, I think it is. And then I give it a name, so you can give it a label so that you can refer to it later. And that's actually what I'm doing here. Because now I'm listening to all requests to GA4. And in this test, I then want to load the page and wait for this GA4 page view event. So I tell Cypress to visit the page. In this case, I put the URL in a variable. I have a settings variable, config variable. And then I tell it to wait for GA4 requests, so matching the interception I just made. And then when it catches one, then I can do something like I just did for the data layer, but in this case I say I want to look at the query string for this request. And then I check in a similar way TID, tracking ID, meaning measurement ID though, EN and DL. So EN, that's the event name, and DL, document location, is supposed to match the page I visited, of course. Yeah, and I'm saying you could do this different ways, but this was the one I wanted to use now. So yeah, so to sum up, this is new to me, but I think people should do it. And if you are doing this already and it was maybe wrong or boring, then please let me know, because I actually want to be smarter at doing this. That's one part of doing it. If you're not doing it, I think you should look into this and get going, because I actually find that it's quite clever. Also, that you can put it in together with, for instance, website deploys. Because what often happens is that, I've tried that multiple times at least, I work with a tracking implementation, some new features launched on a site, and then the tracking is gone, but nobody knows before they look inside of GA. This would then, if you do it in a way like this, then it would be able to block that it even got published to production at least. So yeah, I want to name drop a little bit. Is David in the room? He's probably not. Okay, I will try to say David Vallejo then. Great guy. If you know him, you know he's a really great guy. He made this very nice post article about sending GA4 hits to multiple measurement IDs. But the point about this one is that he goes into how the requests are put together. So what parameters does what and what can you do with them. Very nice. And then Domke de Wilde. Oh, thank you. I wrote a little bit with Domke about Cypress, because he actually created a blog post about it. That kind of got me boosted in this. That was very helpful. Check that out. Then Lucas Oldenburg. Sorry if I put it wrong. Lucas has a very nice post about using Mocha and Chai, but to test Telium IQ specific stuff. That was actually also quite interesting for me to look at. And then we have the all-eternal Simo Ahava, this is actually a really, really old blog post talking about using Phantom.js, which I haven't mentioned, but a framework for this also to test data layer stuff. And then when you talk about Cypress, I don't know if you know about Cypress, but if you talk about Cypress, you also often talk about Gleb Bamutov. He worked at Cypress, very, very cool guy. He has examples, courses, whatever, everything Cypress you can find there if you're interested in Cypress. And then, of course, if you're interested in Cypress, then this is the link to Cypress. It's free. But there's more out there, just not so much about tracking, testing, I would say. And that was what I had for you today.